But just before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to remind you that Featherston Booktown is a smoke-free event. In the case of emergency, exits are located at the back of the room where most of you have come in. If you could please kindly switch your mobiles to silent, that would be much appreciated. And yeah, thank you very much and enjoy the event. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, Featherston Booktown. Welcome to this event on Memoir with us, your oversharing hosts. I'm Megan Dunn, a reformed video artist who once tried to make an artwork about Daryl Hannah. And she's Noelle McCarthy, a recovered alcoholic who once interviewed the Dalai Lama. And we're both here to talk about our bloody mothers. Especially hers. I've written 2 rather eccentric works. The most recent Things I Learned at Art School was partly inspired by a list my mum gave me for my 21st. The list was all about the things she'd learned in life so far, because I said to her once, "What have you learned?" When I received it, I promptly screwed up my nose and lost it and threw it away. More fool me. And where do we start with Noelle, Featherston resident and author of the memoir Grand? It's all there in that succinct and somehow supremely Irish title. The magnitude and contradictions of Carolyn, Noelle's mother, and their fierce and defining relationship. Described as the it memoir with a perfect beginning, middle and end. It takes in the life of Carol and Noelle and also walks into that fiery furnace of our worst female fears, that we have become our mother, that we are our mother. More on that to come, I'm sure. Noelle herself is an award-winning writer and broadcaster. She's interviewed an impressive roster of talent. Literary highlights include, but are not limited to, Eleanor Catton, Margaret Atwood and me, Megan Dunn. At Featherston Booktown a few years ago. So it's my great delight to be here with Noelle. She's also, along with her husband John Daniel, set up Bird of Paradise Productions, and they've made several incredible podcast series together that have strong social themes, from ageing, modern masculinity, to the sex lives of New Zealand women, of which I'm sure we're all very interested. But I think that big picture thinking really shows through in Grand and its universality too. So let's start with Grand, Noelle.
Grand, Megan. You honour me. Thank you. It's so amazing to be here with you. I can't think of a better interlocutor. So
my pleasure.
I'm at your disposal, which she says with a little bit of trepidation, but not that much. Only a little bit. I've read
Don't
your
worry,
book.
I'm not Kim Hill. Not Kim Hill. Close second. Yeah. I thought I'd start with something that we both know, which is coincidentally our mums died very close together. My mum died suddenly on December 31st, 2019. And then just a few months later in March, Noelle's mother passed away too. Bloody cancer. But I think when we spoke recently, it was really interesting to me that most of Grand was written already, or a great deal of it. And I just wanted to open that up and talk about the process of writing it and how your mum's, sickness and death impacted the writing process.
And I think that's a thread that both of us have spoken about in the lead up to this. I think we both felt to a certain extent that life overtook our writing when it came to our mothers, didn't it? And their sicknesses. And I think for me it was when my mother was diagnosed with cancer that I started to write in earnest, that I started to take notes, to put it down. I'd been listening to my husband tell me every time I took him home to Ireland, you need to write this down. You need to get a notebook. You need to follow these people around, And I was just horrified at the idea of writing a book about my family. I just thought, oh well, it's not going to be art, is it? If it's just eavesdropping on my family and writing things down. But of course, one of the things I did learn in the process of writing this book is I wouldn't know a good idea if it hit me in the face, right? Because it turned out actually that my family and my mother in particular is incredibly satisfying. thing to write about and person to write about and relation to write about. And it's funny you talking about, the podcasting work and the oral history work. I went all over New Zealand asking women about their sex lives because it was a conversation that I just wanted to have with my mother, and it was only after I'd done that. And, I'm very grateful to the amazing women who obliged me and shared their stories with me. But, it's amazing, isn't it, how much the left hand might not know what the right hand is doing with creative projects sometimes, because I had no idea that actually that was the important relationship to go back to and to think about. And the more I was writing, the sicker my mother was becoming. And until eventually, I found myself in the situation which is the beginning of Grand, which is that conversation with the doctor that you really never think you're going to have in real life, from films or television, but not in your actual life in Featherston. Yeah.
Did you ever read your mum any of it?
No, I didn't. I mean, the funny thing about sort of following my family around with a notebook was that I did do that, more so in that last 6 months. Not literally, like I'd just have my phone and I would take notes. And they would say, put that away, don't put that in the book. Did you put that in the book? Is that in the book? Is that going to be in the book? So they definitely knew that, something was afoot. And it had become the family joke as well, because, it had been going on for so long. I wondered that about you too, because, you talk about an exchange with your mum when she was in hospital, I think, where she says to you, she's going to come to your book launch.
Oh, yeah.
So she must have known, like your work must have been quite far advanced by the time your mum became ill.
Yeah, that was at the onset of her delirium. Funnily enough. I guess with my book, I had written all the first third of it. I'd written all of the childhood scenes, and Mum had been sick and being treated but hadn't been diagnosed as terminal, and then she ended up in the 2% of a bad reaction to a serious operation. And so I arrived that night as I was aware it was all going pear-shaped, and I got the call, to come. I do, there are things that aren't in there. I mean, one of the things I love about Grand is the fullness of the world and the vision. But yeah, I do remember speaking to my aunt and my mum. My aunt was with Mum at Auckland Hospital, and I was in Wellington. And I remember Mum saying to my aunt, "Oh, she's crying," before I came. So I came in, and anyway, that night she was as lucid as bloody anything. But she was sitting there telling me things, I'm going to get better and go to Africa. And I thought, well, for God's sake, she has trouble walking up the Hankey Street hump. I just don't see how this is going to work out. And then by the time I came back in the morning, we were somewhere else entirely. Mm.
It's so funny you say that about, the fullness of my book, because I left so much out.
Yeah.
I would read the what I'd written. I tried not to edit myself. I don't know if you did this, but I put down a lot in a first draft that I just said. And I wrote it, by hand too.
Yeah, I love that.
To keep that fantasy going as well, that nobody's ever going to see this. It's going to be fine. And it was only later when I came back. And, there were so many things that I thought, you can't. And then I'd put in something else that was kind of worse, So and the funny thing, of course, was, after my sister read the first draft of Grand, she told me about 5 stories that I would have killed to put in, that were absolute gold. One of my brothers wearing the other brother's cardigan at my mother's deathbed, and sort of, that being a bit of an issue. These things that, I don't know, as a writer, we're terrible, really, because there's always that shard of ice, I think, for me now anyway, having gone through the process of noting all of this stuff, I can't stop noticing now. You know, I can't stop noticing in conversations, not just with my family, you know, with everyone, which is,
Yeah, watch it.
yeah.
Well, I'll skip ahead of my questions here and go, well, how long have you really been writing, though? Like, you've really been writing a long time, haven't you? And, like, I wanted to ask a bit, like, you've interviewed so many people, but also so many authors of, you know, huge stature.
Which I totally wouldn't recommend. Like, that's a terrible thing to do if you want to be a writer. You know, I think it's like Ira Glass talks about that curse of good taste.
Yes.
You know, when you start out writing anything, you're hobbled by it. And, you know, if you've sat down and sort of, you know, Margaret Atwood is just sort of, you know, very clinically and sort of forensically nailed, you know, some of the greatest sort of themes of human nature and made up some of the most, you know, compelling stories and images of our time. It's really easy to sort of think, well, that's all done. You know, like that's
So was she putting you off, Margaret?
a little bit. She was a bit off-putting.
Yeah,
just a
she's
little
been
bit.
putting me off too. I think we've finally struck on an important problem here. I did want to say, do you finally feel you've stepped out of the shadows in your bat cape to take a
That's quite good. That's quite
take a bite
vampiric.
at the, you know,
Yes.
at the limelight?
No, because like I had the limelight and it was awful. You know, I had the limelight at a time, you know, when like, you know, people would put photos of you, you know, in your knickers in, you know, gossip magazines and that was fine. You know, that was something that that didn't happen to me personally, but it happened to people I knew, you know, like it was a time in the culture in the early 2000s when it was okay to sort of, you know, to do that and to talk about people, especially women, in a particular sort of way that we've all decided now we don't do anymore, you know. So the sort of the fame such as it was, you know, like world famous in New Zealand fame, was not enjoyable, you know. I mean, I was drinking alcoholically at the time, which was also probably a bit stressful, but you know, the fame was like more stressful again. So I probably, you know, present company accepted. The interviews and the sort of the profile part of it is the least enjoyable. You know, it can be enjoyable, but you know, for me, the satisfaction of grand, such as it is, you know, and it's not inconsiderable, is the sort of, you know, I didn't have to compromise. I didn't have to, you know, anything I left out, I chose to leave out. Anything I changed, you know, there was a process like with really amazing editors, and, you know, we're in the same stable. So, you know what those conversations are like with people who respect you and respect the material, and you get to collaborate, you know. So that was fantastic. Like that was an amazing experience. I love that. I would like more of that, you know. But the limelight, such as it is probably a bit overrated, I think.
What are you proudest of in Grand?
Oh, finishing it. Maybe. No, I was very worried about sending it home. I was very worried about, and I mean, we can talk about this from your perspective as well. Like, you know, when you write about your family, I think, you know, it could go either way, right? And you don't know what way it's going to go. And, you know, I was telling a lot of secrets that weren't necessarily mine to tell either. You know, like I'd grown up with them, but they weren't mine. They were my mother's. And I was telling a few of my own secrets as well, but I was a bit more circumspect about that, I think, you know. So I was worried about how it would be received. And, you know, to go back to what we were talking about at the start with sort of life overtaking the writing, my family were grieving. You know, everyone's in grief and it's chaotic and it's, you know, I think like I wrote at the end of Grand, you know, my editor said, you know, say what your mother was, like say what she was to the family, you know, when I was writing the note at the end of Grand. And I said, you know, she was the weather. because she was, she was everything. And then that person goes and is gone. And everybody's got to reestablish, don't they? So to then lob a book in on top of that, like there was a moment when I really thought, is that right? Like, is that the right thing to do? And, to go back to your question, my sister, I sent her the first 15 chapters. And I think maybe like 3 hours later, she said, send the rest. And I sent the rest. And I fell asleep because it was Irish time. So it was about, 2 in the morning. And I woke up the next morning and she said, I hate saying this, but she said, I can hear Mammy.
Yeah.
And that was,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think everyone can hear her, and there's an astonishing ability to conjure people through their dialogue in Grand, and that extends certainly to Carol, but to many people in the family.
I was so lucky with that. I was lucky that she was just so memorable. I mean, our mothers aren't they? They are. They're the first words we hear, from inside them. And I think it took a while. Like, it took a while to get her.
Did it?
Yeah, and the bits that I remembered were just when I was really small. You can remember those things. She had particular phrases. Like, I think there's a bit in your book where you're going to see the monarch butterflies and they don't turn up. And you say, oh, well, never mind.
Oh, never mind.
Never mind, because your granny used to say it, right?
Yeah, but that was a joke. That was a critical joke from my mother. My mother, had a lot of bitching about my grandmother. And one of it was never mind, And so never mind was recycled with some sarcasm, like, oh, there's a war in the Ukraine, never mind. Oh, that just fell on that man. Oh, never mind.
Never mind.
Like, this is how we would use it in jest a bit. But I mean, there are...
But my mother had so many of those.
Yes, there are a dime a dozen in Grand.
And I actually didn't put them all in because there are... I mean, I was a nurse myself, right? That should have been on my mum's gravestone. It was just a really important line that she used as a way to short circuit any sort of interaction with like like an officious person or someone who was requiring her to fill in a form that she didn't want to fill in or whatever. She'd say, I was a nurse myself, which basically meant like, don't F with me, I was a nurse myself. And I was really sad I didn't get that in there, because that was the essence of Mammy. So, but she had a few.
I've got that in my bag now.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to be a nurse to use that.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's a gift to us all, that one.
Yeah, it might work for everyone.
I did want to ask you about the nurse thing. Like, when was she a nurse? Because I didn't have a sense of her. Like, I know, I had that wonderful scene with you trying on the cap.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it is referred to, and you're very wonderful at portraying that at the end in the hospital when you say, and the doctor,
Oh, she
thinks you're
loved
wonderful.
doctors.
And
Yes. And I told her a lie, like it was... And not quite a lie, but, it was our last goodbye, and I was trying to think of the thing that would make her happy. And I said, the doctor thinks you're wonderful. And, that was a professional pride for her as well, And the idea that he and I had been texting about her, was wonderful. That was a good thing to leave her with. But yeah, she was a nurse. She was a nurse, and she worked in the asylum, which was across the road from our house growing up, which... like, this is Ireland. It's like one of the biggest asylums it has one of the longest corridors in Western Europe. Our Ladies, and we just knew it as Our Ladies or the Madhouse, and we knew that Mammy used to work there. And parts of it had burnt down, there had been various awful sort of tragedies there. I mean, I think, hundreds of years of tragedies there for many people who were incarcerated there. And it was beautiful. Like, it was this incredibly beautiful, crenellated Victorian Gothic building overlooking the river. And you know, it's funny when you look back on your childhood. I was thinking about going out dancing to the beat on the street when I was, 12, the open air discos. And the whole thing was like looked down on. We'd dance in this field, and there's this enormous asylum above us, which people sort of set fire to parts of it occasionally. So there's these blackened windows. It's like, yeah, that's that. So my mum worked there. She stopped working when I was born. So that was in 1978. She was a psychiatric nurse as well, which, again, conjured some magic for her. That was very important to her, the sort of psychological dimension of things. But, so much of her life is a mystery to me. My brother gave the address at her funeral, and he talked about how she had worked with people with eating disorders, which would have been really specialised, like in the 70s. And she'd gone up to Dublin to do that. I had absolutely no idea. Like, never knew. And, it kind of speaks to the fact that, we all had different mothers. She and my brother would have talked about this extensively. But, I think and then she went back, when I was at school, she went back and started looking after priests who had been sent back from the missions, and, they would have malaria or sort of tropical illnesses. And she would and they were all in this big, huge house because they'd be sort of accommodated together. And she would stay in the house all night with them and just talk to them, I think, and pray with them. And then she was convinced, that's why our exam results were good, because the priests had all done the novenas. And, she'd say this as absolute gospel, like it wasn't, she never faltered in her faith. But, I love that in your book, reading about your mum in the nursing home, and, both living upstairs above the rest home. And, in Megan's book, it's these tactile descriptions of artifacts, but also food. I think of food for you and your mum, because you had that bowl of vanilla ice cream in the rest home, but then the cheese on toast she used to make you sounded primo.
Yeah, well, I mean, your food writing is wonderful. You could easily do a sideline there, like they should get you writing for the Featherston Gazette, like reviewing local eateries.
It's called
wonderful.
The Phoenix, but yeah. Maybe there's an in.
But I think food is, the food really takes me inside the home and yours, and that's there in many of the reviews. And I also love that wonderful moment later in the book where you talk about, you're outside and you're having a moment, and then you feel okay, and you text Sarah, and she's about, can we have chips and curry, and it's already on the way. And just the way that food really, I felt that food spoke quite a bit to shame as well, and just shame about class and certain things. I definitely remember being in my 20s once somewhere, and I had the audacity to order nachos out. And my friend who was from art school just, looked at me, and it was clear that the time to order nachos in public had really passed, and I was the last to know about it. But I still like nachos. I'm a terrible cook, and so was my mother. I'm often amazed with what other people can produce, but she was fine at cheese on toast. And the other day I felt crap. I bought a thing of Vogels, and I came home and I made cheese on Vogels, which is exactly what Mum used to do.
Yes, the comfort in your mother's food. She only needed two things. She needed the cup of Milo and the cheese on toast, right? And, and there's a moment towards the end of the book, where your 20s are sort of galloping out of control, and you're in showies and you're knackered and you're bartending 6 nights a week, and you just need Milo. You need your mum's Milo.
And the terrible thing is that Milo bounced back in that new context. When I worked at Showgirls, the strip club, there was a rare minority who would order a Milo. So you would get some, hot-looking stripper. I remember the one exactly who would come up and go, "Can I have a Milo to me at the end of the night?" And I'd be like, "Lady, I don't know what the hell you think I'm here for, but it's not to make you a damn Milo. I'll tell you that, my friend."
She's got this incredible line about the Milo. It's like the cozy domesticity of it is sort of obscene in the context of what's actually going on there. Can we talk about the stripping and the
Yes.
and the parlours? I do want to talk about that because I have this question that I wanted to ask you, which is kind of like, so we're doing Memoir, right? And for me, it was the thing that just came out. I didn't necessarily have a grand plan. I know you had written Tinderbox, which is kind of memoir adjacent as well.
Yeah.
But I wondered, reading about Femme Fatale, when you went, to be a receptionist there at a young age, were you actively looking for material?
Oh, yes. Yes. I was also looking for paid work, though. And I did work in hospitality. I was friends with Yvonne Todd, who I'm still friends with, the artist. She had many hilarious stories from working in a strip club when she was just a bit younger, and we were only in our 20s then. And I think that cottoned me on to, well, maybe I could try and get some work here. And Femme Fatale was just around the corner from me I lived on Hobson Street then. And I was doing bar work, and there was a bar job advertised, and that's why I went for it. I do remember sitting there talking to Holly, one of the working girls who was a friend. And Holly, in downtime at the start of the night before it got busy, we'd all be in the lounge together, me behind the bar, the girls out on the couches, all mooching around. And Holly would sometimes be reading. She was reading Snow Falling on Ciders once, and another time she was reading a book called The Judas Child, both of which I read. And
what's Snow Falling on Cedars like?
It was made into a big film.
Yes.
It did very well. I don't know, but I remember the snow, and it was probably falling on ciders. I'm not very good with trees. It was an epic kind of family romance. I'm sure it was great.
Julia Ormond was in it. I mean, this is kind of getting a
maybe.
bit niche table quiz sort of facts.
Yeah.
But I love your portraits of the women, of the women who worked there, because you're so self-aware. You're aware of the genre. You're aware of the sort of pitfalls of the hooker with the heart of gold stuff.
Well, only because Holly told me. Like one night she was reading a book about a latest book by a New Zealand prostitute, and this must have been around the year 2000. And I said, "What do you think of it?" And she said, "Oh, it's another hooker with a heart of gold story." So my mission was always to write something. Sorry, I'm like lisping here. My mission was always to write something that wasn't a hooker with a heart of gold story, to kind of capture Holly, really.
And you did capture, and I think she probably does have a heart of gold, but it's not in any sort of cliched way. But she was nice to you.
She was great. I mean, yeah, I fucking loved her.
She had the best lines as well.
She did have the best lines. Every which way, she had the best lines. And she's the only woman in my life who's ever called me Fluffy Bunny. And that was her nickname for me.
Yeah,
Fluffy Bunny.
Between the fluffy bunnies and the frosty pussies, there's a lot of really vivid animal imagery in your book. I love that you noticed the art. Who goes and works in a massage parlour and really notices the goldfish on the walls?
Well, that was a big black framed calligraphic picture of goldfish in a pond. And that just came back to me vividly. There wasn't a lot of art at Femme Fatale, but that was there. It matched the kind of black leather sofas that were around it. And we also had a little TV mounted up in a corner on one wall. And I think that's in one scene actually. One night it's dead quiet. It's just us girls there together, and Blades on.
Of course, I noticed that.
Vampire film. And we were really getting into it, and then the bloody bell rang, and I was like devastated. Damn it. The girls' slumber party watching Blade is over, and now we have to all perform our roles for one lonely customer.
Everyone had to put their high heels on.
Yeah, you put your high heels back on, and you all sit up and make nice and get things. Let's get this party started. I mean, I once made a terrible work about the sex industry using that Muppets theme song, it's time to get things started. Why don't you get things started? I felt like that was just, yes, exactly.
Lends itself to it. Did you learn anything about yourself writing your book? I mean, this is a very obvious question, but I feel like,
That's my question for you.
Is
too.
it? Okay.
Who shall go first?
You
Shall
go
I
first. I asked you first.
Yes, I did. I did learn things about myself writing this. I mean, I wrote some things I really wasn't expecting to write. Like, I wasn't expecting to write a piece thinking about the days at Errata. There were a few plaques and catchphrases on our wall at home in the granny flat with Mum growing up. I wasn't expecting how deep they'd gone into me, how much I'd tried to reject them, and yet how deeply they informed me. And definitely one of the very sad moments for me when Mum was dying or gravely ill in hospital, my aunt called me one morning, because they're all Catholic, and said, you know, I want to say a prayer with you. And it was the prayer of serenity. And just when she started, God grant me the serenity, I think a cry came out of me, because I now have that tiny ceramic plaque on my wall at home of the prayer of serenity that Mum had. And it was like it had bounced back into my soul, and I suddenly understood what it really meant. And I was reeling from it. Also, Mum was a great one for birthday cards. And the last birthday card, I probably will write about this, haven't done it yet. The last birthday card she gave me was "Make a wish," it said on the outside, and it had a candle, you know, cake and big candles, and then you open it up and it said, "Not that one." Oh! That's my mum's last fucking birthday card to me. Wow. But she gave me one when I was 14, which she always regretted. It has a very silly cartoon of a rabbit holding a balloon on the front, and it says, "Good girls write diaries," and then you open it up and it says, "Bad girls don't have time."
I have another question.
And that was very informative for my life's work. But that's from Tallulah Bankhead, and before she died, I'd finally Googled it, and we had a chat one day, and there's a very short piece in there. And I do remember saying to Claire Murdoch, our publisher, saying, "I've found the source of everything. It's Tallulah Bankhead. That's what it is."
So many things. Yes, okay, that's a different question that I have for you, so I'll ask it and we can come back to it. But, you know, do you have to be a bad girl to write a memoir? When you have to be a good girl to get
Goodness,
it down?
doesn't it help? I've only got the Marilyn Monroe reaction to that one. Let's go on to what did you learn about yourself?
It's exactly as you said. I mean, the breath caught in my chest when you said that. And it was also lovely to hear the Serenity Prayer in a different context.
Yeah.
Civilians use it too. But I love the sort of revelation of the depth of simple things, you know, that I had cast off as insufficiently sophisticated to be worthy of my attention. You know, because like my story as a teenager was like just this kind of relentlessly aspirational child who at different points was actively sort of appalled by my parents, you know, and wanted to get out, you know, wanted to do whatever they had done to do the opposite. And that's why, you know, the book didn't get its subtitle, Becoming My Mother's Daughter. I didn't think of that until it was finished. You know, because that was the revelation. It was like, oh my God, you know, in Ireland there's a saying, she didn't lick it off a stone, you know? Like, I am my mother's daughter in all of these ways. I have the same sort of, I have the same sentimentality. I have the same simple faith in, you know, things that maybe I shouldn't have faith in. You know, I have the same beliefs in a lot of ways as she does. And you know, there was the revelation of knowing that a lot of the sort of self-destructive part of my nature was absolutely sort of, you know, that was generational and generations repeating. But yeah, I think the pleasurable side of that is to look at, you know, the bad art, but I mean, what is bad art? You know, that my mother, she was obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, and she would, you know, I mean, why do you think we're together? But today, but you know, she would send me Alice's, she would send me birds, you know, she would send me these terrible sort of, you know, the pirate swallows, which are back now. I think people are getting tattoos of this now, but my mother loved it long before it was cool again. Yeah.
But she was also stylish, wasn't she? And that comes through a bit. Like, you know... Like
was anyone stylish in the 80s, though?
Yes,
with respect.
I say boldly, yes, they were.
She was, actually. You know, yeah.
She likes a photograph.
She adored a photograph. Yes. And she was an absolute creative director. I mean, I'm reading you and Yvonne, you know, going out to the shore and doing sort of your shoots, you know, your amazing shoots. My mother would have loved it. You know, she would just have adored it. And, you know, she had standards. Take a photograph, show me that. That's not a good one. You know, edit that, we'll do it again. And everything was documented, and it was such a resource when I started writing, because, like, you know, it's like you say, you've never kept a diary, which I find amazing.
Oh, it's really stupid. I mean, you know.
If you're going to be a writer, is she on? You might have to. Here, you take that one. I'll turn you on. I'll turn you on, Megan.
It's good when you're with professionals. It's just really stupid that I've never kept a diary. It's really stupid. And when I read, like, I've written an unpublished novel years ago, which was on the sex industry, and I was really pleased I'd written it, because there's all this stuff that you just never remember now. So please keep a diary. I mean, for God's sake, if you're going to write, really, do yourself a favour.
Just notes on your phone. Yeah, we might have to share. Yeah, we'll be share bears until Toby comes up. And then what was my next question? I'd asked you another question. Do you have to be a bad girl to write a memoir? What do you think?
Oh, God. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. It feels like being a bad girl is a bit of a stereotype now in itself. I mean, I've got a question that I think is related. I think it's a related question, which is, do you think you were a good daughter, Noelle? And then I've wondered about the process of writing about Mum. What part of being a good daughter am I playing out there or not playing out there, or even thinking about how to define myself now without Mum. Like, there's that cracking Renee comment on Noelle's book about the, you know, the once in a life reality check, you know, the death of the mother, you know, for us all. And yeah, I think that question is actually secretly related. I mean, am I bad? Yes, but not like what we're talking about, I don't think.
Nobody's had the balls to ask me that. You know, you're the first, and it's a great question. Like, it's the heart of it, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, it depends on what metric you're using, right?
Yeah,
like, I think I was a reasonably entertaining daughter. and I'm not just saying that to be funny. I'm kind of saying that to be funny. But, you know, my mother set a very high store by being entertained. You know, she demanded it. Like, her boredom and frustration in Cork City was such that, you know, being entertaining was the least you could do for her. You know, that was how she felt. I need to tell my therapist this, don't I? But, you know, we laughed. Like, we really did. I remember the first time watching Withnell and I with her. You know, the first time watching Woody Allen with her, which is problematic now, unfortunately. But, you know, like, we loved it. And I scared her. You know, like, in fun sometimes, but sometimes I scared her, and she liked it, you know, like with just simple things. Like, I remember breastfeeding publicly. I think I said this when Kim Hill and I were talking about this, but she was horrified and delighted. You know, she would follow me. She would erupt into a cafe in Cork where I was sitting with like a muslin and fling it over me. And, look at you, you're doing it again. You know, because I think like, and this is, I guess, where you have to broaden it out a bit and look at Ireland and look at what women's lives were like. You know, the women of her generation who, you know, some of them didn't go into the Magdalene laundries, but some of them did, you know. So I think I did entertain her. I think definitely, and of course this was the other part of the story, having a child and getting married was, you know, enormously sort of validating for her. And, you know, I think she just relaxed after that. She relaxed visibly because there was another person there that she could sort of, you know, she had a grandchild, so, you know, which was a very sort of traditional way of making her happy, but she was, you know, that made her happy. She wouldn't have cared about a book, you know, not as much as a granddaughter.
My daughter was a very transformational part of my relationship with mum too. And I love all of the stuff about Eve. And I found myself thinking, you know, reading of the birth and the time in hospital, you know, kicked by a horse in the vagina. You know, it's like, gosh, this is also useful. It's like, I should have been reading stuff like this. It should be on the bedside table, you know, when you're in hospital. Like, you get through, you have the baby, and then you've kind of got no orientation.
Yeah, I wish someone had said that's not because you did anything wrong. That's how it's supposed to feel. I love listening to you saying that, and I think that's kind of, I know you're about to say something else, but I just want to say, I think that's why I love writing memoir, you know, writing, I'm distrustful of the word memoir. It sounds slightly pretentious, doesn't it? But, you know, all right, first person writing. Because it is arranging the facts of your life into a story. And, you know, I am so not the only person who does that. We all do that. And we look to stories, you know, to see ourselves reflected. Like, everyone who talks to me about Grand doesn't talk about Grand. They talk about their family, like they talk about their mum and their grandfather and their auntie, or, you know, I love that.
Yeah. Like, there's a wonderful intergenerational portrait coming through in Gran too, of the grandmothers on each side, and a sense of, you know, the social forces that are shaping us generation by generation. There's a very famous Audre Lorde quote, "I am a reflection of my mother's secret poetry as well as her hidden angers." And I wondered where you think your own writing comes from, if it comes from somewhere in the family. I know offline that you've got other writers and your siblings. And I wonder if you think, you know, obviously, you know, do you think your mum felt fulfilled? Obviously you don't. And what was there for her, you know, like, do you think, are you a reflection of your mother's secret poetry, is the short question.
That is a magnificent quote, isn't it? And I mean, my mother's anger was not secret. It was not secret, you know, it was absolutely there on the surface. But, you know, after she died, a friend of mine said to me, and, you know, I don't know if it's true, but it was a lovely thing to say. She said, you know, we are our parents' best work. And I do actually think my mother felt that, not just about me. I mean, she and I, it's not a competition, but we probably had the most contentious relationship of all my siblings. But I know she valued us all immensely, and she respected that we could fight with her and sort of go toe to toe in that way, you know, because it was quite adversarial. But she loved a good story as well. Like, you know, she put so much store by being able to tell a good story. I mean, she told terrible stories. She would always get sort of caught up in the details. You know, it was 4:10. No, I'm telling a lie. It was 4:20. It was 4:20 and the electricity office was closed. You know, she would get sort of really caught up in that. But I think she could have been brilliant. You know, she could have been brilliant at so many things. I imagine she probably was a brilliant nurse. You know, she was certainly incredibly capable, compassionate person in looking after others. You know, I saw her, we were driving past a car once, and I haven't thought about this for years, but I thought about it the other day. We were driving past a car that had gone into a ditch and, had clearly, driven into a pole or whatever. It was a bad, bad accident. And there were two people who, one was on the ground and, my parents were driving and they pulled over and, they made sure we couldn't see, which makes it worse, always. But obviously one of the people was dying and she was with them, and she sat there and she sat on the side of the road. And that was a sort of, situation that actually did bring out the best of her character, the best of her. She was very good in a crisis, and I think she was frustrated. She was a frustrated sort of person, but she had depth. What do you think? Were you a good daughter?
I have thought I was a very bad daughter. And in some ways, I definitely was. But then recently I was thinking, I moved back to New Zealand in 2010 and Mum was about to turn 60. And I wanted to be here for her 60th. And, we've got some photos of me and her taking her out to dinner and stuff. And I thought, maybe I wasn't so bad, maybe I wasn't so bad. Yeah. But I do wonder about that jostle in the writing, and the tension between wanting to be good, wanting to be bad, running away from certain things in the family, then finding them within yourself. All the old big crunchy cliches, but doesn't make them less to contend with in our real lives. Yeah.
They're huge. And, I was struck when you were talking, all of Grand is just my perspective. I could be completely wrong about, and that sort of terrified me towards the end of writing the book, not only realizing that I was getting basic facts wrong, like what the carpet looked like, but just this idea that I'm so sort of subjective.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but then again, who judges? Like, who's going to judge whether we're great daughters or, what's the judgment? What's that based on even?
I guess exactly. And I guess the question is from within really though, right? But like why, I mean, in my book I've got a piece called Sorry Mother, which it begins with Mum saying everyone blames the mother. It was an open address, but in my case it was true. For years I had blamed my mother. I just think, I'd love to go round and get this from every woman in the room, like why is the figure of the mother, we're so maligned, so essential, so inessential. It's just such a big thing. But although when I've said this to my father, he'd said, well, what about the father? And I've said, well, yes, Dad, that is very bad too.
That was the first thing Kim Hill said to me, and I wasn't expecting it. It's like, what about your dad? What was he doing? Neither parent gets off.
There's a lovely tender portrait of your dad in there, though. That's a very tender, vulnerable page on him.
Yeah. And it didn't, I guess the thing is, the relationship with my dad, thank you, it doesn't have the same intensity.
Yeah.
It's a different intensity with my mother. And, a relief I felt writing Grand as well was to zoom out and sort of, and this mightn't be on the page, but just to see it in the context of society. Like my mother had 4 children before she was 40. She got children's allowance once a month and whatever money my dad gave her, and he's pretty, I don't think he didn't give her money. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but that was kind of what she had, and, so the days she spent with her friends in the Chimes or the Raven or wherever she was, I hated it. I hated it because I was bored and I was tired and I just wanted to go home. But I look back on that now in the context of where she was and what was going on and what was happening in the culture. And, I'm more inclined to sort of, I have this grudging respect as well because she carved out her time, like she gave herself that time with her friends to be a whole person, in as far as she could be, you know, in that context. And, you know, those are the stories that I'm now writing about. You know, she gave me all this material.
She has given you a massive gift, for sure, but your gift has matched it. I just want to cut away for a second and say there's this wonderful bit with Noelle's dad where for some reason every now and then they drop off a little thing of kittens into the woods when she's a child, and they're in the car and these kittens get dropped off, and her dad will say, oh, they'll be grand. There's plenty of food for them in the woods.
That was at the asylum.
God, I laughed.
That's in the madhouse. So that was in the asylum, and we just dropped them off. And you know, it was years later that I thought to myself, "What happened to kittens?" You know, like what happened to kittens? But it was that sort of thing that by the time I got into my teenage years, I was sort of obsessed with people who'd have pets that, you know, someone in the family would have spayed, you know, and get microchipped or whatever it was. You know, I was obsessed with these sort of markers of middle classness or, you know, a lack of chaos, whatever it was, you know, that I certainly didn't have or felt was lacking, you know, because I was in school with all of these just, you know, I mean, it's funny, I feel a bit bad about my description of school because not all the girls there were rich. But they certainly seemed to me to have a more ordered life than I had, you know, like there weren't kittens being regularly delivered. Because cats have lots of kittens. And I had 2 cats, you know. So I did, it plagued me growing up. And I guess that's good stuff as well because that's how you notice. I don't know, when did you start noticing? Because you're an amazing noticer. You notice so much, you know, you notice the art in the hospital when your mum is dying, you notice the art in the massage parlour, you notice the art on the walls of your friends' houses.
I think this is just revealing my not so secret life as an art writer.
You notice the dust. There's a line where you talk about the whirling dust motes of another chaotic mid-90s day.
Yeah, but I've written that many times. It's like the dust motes are the only thing I've noticed. Once you've been writing a while, you find yourself scraping the barrel. Like at a certain point, in my reviews, I found I was always saying in art reviews a whiff of something, and it's not until you stop and read a few of your reviews that you're like, no. Time to take a break, dear.
No, I think you're doing yourself down there. I mean, there are 2 descriptions of dust motes now that I think of it in your book, but they are both equally beautiful. And, you know...
This is what should really be on the back. There are 2 descriptions of dust motes in this book, but they're both equally beautiful.
But you know what? Like, noticing's all we have. You know, like noticing is all we have. The details are all we have, I think, and that's how we connect.
Well, you've got a great sense of smell, and that's all you have, because I really don't have that. Hey, let's have a reading from Noelle. I'd love you to read just the very beginning, because there's a wonderful description that I think as a mum of a small kid, you know, it just instantly resonated with me, the importance of wolves.
I've got your copy. So the funny thing about this bit was this is one of the first things I wrote. I didn't know it was going to be grand. I didn't know it was going to be a book. You know, I didn't know anything really. I was reading to my daughter. When I was very small, I loved wolves, she told me. I used to go to bed with one under my pillow. Couldn't fall asleep without him. The wolf in Eve's Little Red Riding Hood book has a big bushy tail and a tweed jacket with a knife and fork in his top pocket. All the better to eat you with, madam. We got a different version of the story out of the library recently, a beautifully illustrated one where nobody rescues Red Riding Hood at the end. She stays in the wolf's belly. Eve took it in her stride, but I was haunted. Mammy was a werewolf. It only took 1 sip of drink to change her. The first mouthful of the first pint of carling, all the evil came out dancing. Her face would change, but subtly. Her eyes would brighten, and her nose would lengthen. everything about her became wilder and sharper and more alert. That was when the barman would need to watch himself.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And I love it how the wolf and the vampire are aligned with the female characters, and they're usually villainous characters. I wondered if you wanted to give us a few pennies on your ongoing Dracula obsession, or how those two animals, become useful images for the book.
Yeah, and they were. And it's funny, isn't it? I don't know if this happened to you writing your book, but it was only afterwards I saw this. It was only afterwards that I saw, when I'd written a description of giving birth, how my teeth had lengthened. Yeah. And I mean, that was the fentanyl, like that was an epidural. But, I was really, really high and sort of out of my mind. And my husband said to me, your face changed, you looked different. And there's other places in the book as well, I think, where, Mammy's aligned with those, with the vampire. She was obsessed with the American Werewolf in London, with the movie. And they're close, and that was a gift that my mother gave me, because I don't remember being obsessed with wolves as a very young child, because I was too young. But she said this to me throughout my life, and it just became sort of part of the family mythology, And even with vampires, I mean, she was never particularly into vampires, but she tried to support it. When she thought, when she realized they were important to me, she just started buying me these terrible vampires, like really cheesy sort of, little, or fangs, or, little Halloween things, So she did try to encourage my obsessions without even trying, really, like, without ever questioning them. She just kind of came to the party with that. And they were important when I was writing the books, because I think those symbols are really, they're great, aren't they, when you're writing? Because it's like the mermaid, right? Like there's just so much that you can project onto it and do with it. And I think once you start getting into symbols, everyone loosens up a bit, because you're sort of...
Yeah, I agree.
Things are starting to get a bit fruity. So that was really, I mean, my book is very much set like it's in the real world. It really happened, all of that. But to have a little bit of the fantasy and the monsters in there is really important, because that's what it's like inside my head anyway. Do you feel like that about mermaids? Come on, we've got to do it.
Yes. I mean, like, I've got transcribes with mermaids. I've got, something I was trying to get to the bottom of that I realised was bottomless. Terrible puns, and I do like a terrible pun. So I do think that was part of my attraction to the mermazing world of people working as mermaids as well. But I agree that symbols loosen people up. I kind of feel like mermaids it's always a good icebreaker. It's easy to talk about it. You don't need to be terribly interested. Everyone can have an image in their mind. It's not like you're saying, I was just mauled by a vicious pack of dogs outside, and we all have to build up to how we'll talk about that together. Like it's a very easy threshold device to come on over. And then you could find yourself talking about, something completely peculiar.
The wolves are funny, though, for me, because, I've never been particularly interested in a wolf. Like, I've seen them in zoos and things, and I think they're very beautiful. I remember when they were making The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe here, they imported some wolves from Norway, didn't they? And they were sort of wandering, acting wolves. And they were wandering around, and they were magnificent. Like, wolves are beautiful, but I was never interested in that. Like, I was only interested in pictures of wolves. And it's really interesting, like, my daughter's at the stage now where she's interested in documentaries. She's interested in, like, actually, and documentaries are so good now, of course. It's all 3D and sort of amazing. But, that was never interesting to me. I just wanted the drawing or the, you know, even a woodcut, you know, those
Yes.
amazing old woodcuts. And that's the great thing about the Little Red Riding Hood story. You know, it's so old and weird and sexy and creepy and, you know.
What's a kind of nugget from your PhD that never happened about Dracula? Like, what was the...
I never got down to the nugget.
What's the upshot? Like, why are we, you know, why is that so enduring?
It's sex, isn't it? You know, it's sex.
Is it?
Well, yeah, same as a mermaid's, surely.
Well, that's what Kim Hill said. And I was loath to disagree with her.
Aren't we all? Well, do you know what it is? It's the same as Memoir. It's project.
Like, get like the sessions themselves out of it. There's a sense of it happening. Did you ever write out things that have happened in therapy? Because I think...
I mean, I was operating on the basis that, like, I go to therapy so I don't have to write about going to therapy, you know, like, so I don't have to write as therapy.
Yeah.
You know, I do therapy, I do all the other things that sort of support being able to write and look at my family in that way. And that means I don't have to put it on the page. Like, you know, it is there, as you say, but I just wanted to tell a good story as well, you know, and I think sometimes, like, there are writers who can do that, who can make their process really fascinating and interesting. Like, I was reading Leslie Jameson again recently, you know, and she can, that's what she does, and I'm not that, you know, so I felt like a lot of the work, you know, that we do on ourselves, you know, it doesn't have to be, I do it so I can do that, but it doesn't have to be in there. What do you think?
I think I'm at the more incoherent end of the spectrum. Me and my mermaids are sinking down into the primordial ooze. Drowning, not waving, yeah.
With their crispy chip hair.
One thing, you know, which is wonderful and grand is the Carol's op shop obsession. And when Noelle and I were talking on Zoom recently, my mum was a big op shopper too, and my grandmother was an op shopper. And after Mum died, I've inherited all these papers and things, including a little book about my grandmother's life. And in it, I found this poem called Heaven's Op Shop that I was telling Noelle about. So it's about someone who's walking down the street and they go into Heaven's Op Shop. And I thought if you'd bear with me, I'd read you a little bit.
Love to.
The staff were all angels. They were standing everywhere. One handed me a basket and said, "Shop with care." I hope the poets are taking note here. "And if you can't carry it, we deliver anywhere. We'll bring it with pleasure on a wing and a prayer." Well, I first bought some patience. I knew mine was getting low, and some packets of love on the very same row. I thought I need wisdom. I'd buy some if I could. They said it's expensive, but it's very, very good. How about understanding? I need plenty of that. They said it's on special. Keep it under your hat. Then I asked very kindly, have you got any grace? They smiled and replied, it's all over the place. There was kindness, sincerity, manners and respect, and a sign said salvation, just call and collect. I found peace, I found joy. I thought it was great. I tried to buy beauty, but they said, it's too late. Yeah.
What a cracker.
Well, it does go on, but I don't want to, yeah. Because I knew just outside I'd run into sin. I just couldn't believe it was a second-hand store. But the manageress assured me it's all been used before.
Oh.
This is from copyright Trevor Rowe, Box 3, Stratford, New Zealand.
Kia ora, Trevor. Yeah. Megan brought me that poem, and I brought this for Megan because if you've read Megan's book, you know that this is a painting that plays a big part in your story, and I got it in an op shop.
Yeah, wonderful.
$5.
Yeah, wonderful.
So we're nearly out of time, but will you, if anyone isn't familiar with this artwork?
Well, this is Christina's World by the American painter Andrew Wyeth, a very famous painter, famous for, I think he uses tempera, and he's done many, many amazing works, but Christina's World is probably one of the ones that's certainly been widely reproduced, one of the most widely reproduced images out there, I would say. It's based on a neighbour of his, although who did have some kind of disability. I first remember seeing it as a child, and I just always found it captivating. And when I first saw it as a child, it somehow always portrayed to me something about adulthood that I couldn't quite fathom, and wasn't sure I wanted to get to either. But I just love it. I feel like it's an emotional landscape that everyone can relate to, even though it's actually this very specific American landscape and a portrait of his neighbour, Christina. There's a very funny BuzzFeed, 10 kind of bullet points, 10 things you didn't know about Christina's World online, which I use liberally when I cover this piece, which I myself bought from an op shop and hung above my bed in my 20s, and still love. So I was thank you, Noelle, for bringing that in.
And now, of course, in my life, the haunted house there looks like that one up by Carterton. Simon's nodding, doesn't it? So you can project anything you want on Christina's World. I think we're nearly out of time. Do you have any other
maybe
questions?
some people have some questions, and I haven't generously allowed time. If anyone has a question for, yes.
Take it away, Megan.
My mother was my biggest fan, really. I mean, was I the daughter she would like me to be? She was completely accepting of me, even though at times I wouldn't have been a very easy daughter to have. And she was, she really was my biggest fan. And I've lost my biggest fan, and I've realised I've somehow been, getting myself together again after that loss. She was a very generous, nice lady.
Yeah, I think, my mother completely accepted me as me. She pushed back, but she never wanted me to change, or she never expressed that wish and hope. And, I ended up living thousands of miles away from her in a country that she'd never been to. And, a gift after she died was discovering how much we actually had kept in touch. Like the photo on the cover of Grand is a photo that I sent to her in 2005 and completely forgot about that she had kept, so actually that was another thing I discovered, those strings, those invisible strings were still there. Mm. Yeah. Anyone else?
If there's no one else, I will just thank you all for being a beautiful audience and encourage you to read Grand if you haven't already. Yeah, thank you so much.
And things I learned at
Noelle.
Thank you very much, Noelle and Megan. That was just fantastic. Thank you for sharing your life stories, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more to come. Megan and Noelle are signing books just out in the Anzac Hall. If you'd like to buy copies, they're available too. So many more events happening in Booktown this weekend. Go out and enjoy.